So it turns out that the Yu-Gi-Oh community will have a pretty big reaction if a card is revealed that has the combined effects of two of the best sort of old school spell cards that were ever released in Yu-Gi-Oh, and that is this new card from Ignition Assault. So this card at the moment, the OC translated name is Lightning Storm. I'm not sure if it'll be that way when it comes to TCG, but this is what we're calling it for right now, and this card is insane, and I want to talk about it in today's video. And I do want to mention here that by the time you guys are seeing this video, you might have seen some other discussions about this card, because I'm going to upload this video on Sunday, but at the time of recording it, this card has only been revealed for a few hours, so I've had a little bit of time to digest it, but I needed to upload this before I left for the YCS this weekend. So if you guys have thought of some other stuff that I don't mention in this video, that's probably why, because I've only seen it for a couple hours. But we're talking about this card in particular because I feel like the initial knee-jerk reaction to it is, oh my god, this is the most broken card ever, I don't want to play when this card comes out. And that's kind of what my reaction was. I mean, not to the extent of, oh, I don't want to play when this card comes out, but definitely to the extent of, oh my gosh, how do I ever play a back row deck with this card in the game? But I've had that reaction a few times, and one of the things that I've learned is that all of these cards, all these back row removal cards that have been released, and trust me, there's a lot of them, even without Heavy Storm and Harpie's Feather Duster in the TCG, I've learned that there are always counters to them, and your opponent doesn't always have all of those cards in their side deck, and this card isn't perfect. It is very, very good though, so we're going to talk about it in today's video. Keep in mind, this card won't be revealed or released in the TCG for a little while now. This card just got revealed in the OSG for the next core set, so as far as the TCG goes, you're looking at about a 4-month window before this card actually hits the metagame. Now, the way that most people seem to be describing this card, which is perfectly fine by the way, is that it's a combination of both Regeki and Harpie's Feather Duster, and that makes sense because that is basically what it is, but it does have a few key differences that people seem to be missing when they first read through it. So this is a hard twist and turn ability, so you can't activate multiple, and it's an ability that you can only activate when you control no face-up cards. Now please keep in mind, one thing that I've seen a lot of people miss when they read this thing is that you are allowed to control set cards. That is something to keep in mind when you're playing a back row deck, and you might consider putting this in your side deck or main deck. You in fact are allowed to have face down cards. If you have like some back row cards or perhaps even a defense position monster face down, you are still allowed to use this ability. What does it do? Well, basically the first effect is that you can destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls. The second effect is that you can destroy all back row your opponent controls, and those are two really, really good effects. Keep in mind here that the first effect isn't quite Regeki, because Regeki can destroy all monsters. This one only destroys face up attack position ones, so that is a slight difference. In reality though, I don't think that makes a huge change here though, because I feel like most people put their monsters in attack mode, and then obviously with like Link monsters, they can only be in attack mode, so that part doesn't matter that much. Don't get me wrong, that effect probably will come up a few times if you're playing this card, but Dark Hole and Regeki are both legal in the TCG, and people aren't playing them at all. I mean, they're really just nowhere to be found in the competitive landscape, and that makes sense, right? We have a lot of cards to address combo decks going second. We have all these different hand traps. We just got Nibiru, super powerful card that can just wipe an entire board, and that tributes them instead of destroying them, and also it's really hard to negate, because your opponent has to have a monster negation effect on the first turn that can negate things in the hand. So a lot of people are playing hand traps, but even if you're not doing that, you might be playing like Dark Ruler No More, a card that can't be responded to with monster abilities, which is really, really solid. So people really aren't playing Regeki and Dark Hole. That effect probably will come up a few times, but when I look at this card, and when most people look at this card, they're not looking at it because of that ability. They're looking at it because of the second effect, which is super powerful. So the second effect is literally just a Harpie's Feather Duster, which is really, really strong, obviously. Now, as a back row player, I mean, I want to mention here that every time a new card comes along that destroys back row, I get a little bit worried. You know, we had Evenly Match, we have Red Reboot, obviously Twin Twisters back in the day. That sounds weird to say back in the day. It's 2016, not too long ago, but every time we get one of these new forms of back row removal, it's like, okay, this is the death of back row decks, and that doesn't actually happen, because one of the things that I want you guys to really keep in mind here when you're thinking about this type of card or any type of card that destroys back row, it's really powerful. You know, I remember this happening when Hey Trunade came out, and it's like, wow, Hey Trunade is a really strong card. It's basically Giant Trunade, which is a banned card, but it has one key difference. And while I feel that this card's one key difference isn't as much of a drawback as Hey Trunade, I feel like the ability to only bounce set cards, which is Hey Trunade, isn't nearly as good as the ability or the drawback here of not having to control any face-up cards. Not having any face-up cards is a lot easier to achieve, and only wanting to bounce your opponent's set cards. And I think you guys can understand here that one of the key problems with these types of cards is that there's so many of them in the format. Right now, when I go to an event, I'm worried about Red Reboot and Evenly Match and Twin Twisters and Cosmic Cyclone and Prankatops, and while all those cards are very effective, and while I might play against each one of those cards 1 or 2 times at a tournament, no one has the side deck space, no one has the main deck space to play all all of those cards at one time. When you look at tournament topping deck lists, you don't see a side deck full of 15 forms of back row removal. And the reason is I mean, there's a couple reasons, but one of the reasons is that you don't actually have to draw like multiple copies of a lot of those cards against the back row decks. You only need to draw like one or two. If it's something like evenly matched red reboot, you might even need to only draw that one copy, and it can just completely rip apart your opponent's entire board, and you can OTK them if it's red reboot, or just decimate all of their setup with that evenly match. But what you find here is that people aren't only playing against back row decks at tournaments, they're playing against combo decks. Even with Nibiru in the format, combo decks are everywhere. I mean, Orcus is the best deck. Orcus variants, Orcus Lunalights, you have Orcus Cyber Dragons. All these different decks are like the best decks of the format, and they're combo strategies. So when people are building side decks, they're not only building them for these back row decks, they're also building them for combo decks. What I'm trying to get at here, and why this is important, is that when you're playing a card like this in your side deck, it's taking the place of something else. And I want to make that very, very clear. You're not going to see someone playing 3 copies of this, and 3 copies of evenly matched, and 3 copies of red reboot. It's just unrealistic. So when I'm preparing against this card, I have to imagine that if they're playing this card, they've cut something else. Is that Twin Twisters? I'm not really sure. Is it red reboot, evenly match? It's any one of those things. And even though in theory this card can be sided against combo decks because it is like a free card that forces one of their negations, I feel like in general when people are going to play this card, they're playing it against those back row decks. But then I compare this card to evenly match, because if you're only using this card against the back row decks, isn't evenly match in a lot of cases just better? And I know it's sort of like a hot take, because I know Harpie Spellduster, if that card came back, it'd be insane, everyone would play it. They'd probably only still play that card like on top of like evenly match and red reboot, because it'll only be a 1 of if it ever got unbanned. But this card is coming out as a 3 of, and that makes me want to compare it to evenly match, because if you're only playing this card for back row decks, isn't evenly match in a lot of cases just a more effective card? And what I mean by that is that evenly match is a card that just banishes everything face down, and when you banish stuff face down, that is like the most permanent way to get rid of something, at least for the moment. Yes, there are cards that can get cards that are banished face down back into your hand, or back into your deck, or back into the graveyard, but in general, most people aren't going to have ways to actually put those cards back anywhere valuable. And that's sort of when I was thinking, okay, is this card actually broken? I mean, don't get me wrong, this card is going to be played. It's probably going to be a secret rare when it comes out in the TCG. I'm just calling that right now. It'll probably be like one of the chase cards of the set, and I think a lot of people will play this card, but it's not unbeatable. And I think that when you're thinking of side decking against this card, if you're a back row deck, you really have to imagine that your opponent is cutting other cards from their side deck that you now no longer have to prepare for. Well, there are a couple cards that can stop this thing that couldn't really stop those other things, like evenly matched and red reboot. One of them is going to be like the huge revolution is over. I feel like that if this card becomes super popular and people are playing this card and Twin Twisters, I wouldn't put it past a back row player to play the huge revolution is over. That seems really solid. And what's cool about playing against Lightning Storm, I mean, it's not really cool to play against if you're playing a back row deck, but one of the things that you can at least know that you have the benefit of is that your opponent pretty much has to play it as the first thing. Unlike Twin Twisters, or unlike Cosmic Cyclone, or unlike Red Reboot, those are cards that your opponent can save until they really need them to pop specific cards. But with this one, they pretty much have to do it as the first thing they're going to activate, because if they summon anything, if they put any card face up, now they can't use it anymore. So when you're playing against this card, if your opponent doesn't do it immediately, you can pretty much assume in most cases they don't actually have it, which means now you know what you can use your negations for, unlike evenly match. I mean, evenly match isn't a great example, because those go to battle phase and you know you have to negate it there. But as far as things like Twin Twisters and Cosmic Cyclone, like, you don't know when your opponent actually is going to drop those cards on you, so you always have to be playing around them when you're playing a back row deck. But because they're using this card first, you can just hit it with like Starlight Road or Huge Revolution is over, and while that might not seem super strong, if people cut evenly match and Red Reboot from their side decks and play this card and Twin Twisters, well, yeah, that's like 6 cards in your opponent's side deck that they're definitely going to be siding against you that you now have a pretty good counter for, that I think a lot of people might not see coming. But another card that I feel is very, very appealing to anyone looking to play against Lightning Storm in the coming months when it eventually comes out is Waking the Dragon. You know, I've had mixed thoughts about that card in the past, because a lot of times it just can never be activated, and it feels weird playing a card that you yourself can't actually activate, that requires your opponent to do something specific. But I think if your opponent is playing Twin Twisters, and if they're playing Lightning Storm, if Lightning Storm comes out and everyone is playing it in their side decks, yeah, Waking the Dragon could be huge, because keep in mind, once again, your opponent has to do a Lightning Storm. I mean, they don't have to, but in most cases they'll be doing a Lightning Storm as their very first move. So if they Lightning Storm your whole board and you activate the Waking the Dragon, you summon like Last Warrior from another planet, you summon Aturia Exterio depending on the matchup, your opponent now, I mean, they blew up your entire back row. That's really good for them, but they can't summon monsters or they can't activate spell or trap cards. Either one of those cards seems really deadly against the right matchups, and that makes this card a little bit less appealing, because it can be pretty scary just if one has 4 back row or 3 back row, using this card and hitting Awaken the Dragon and just locking yourself out of the game. In those cases, something like Twin Twisters could also do that, but maybe something like Red Reboot or Evenly Match is a little bit safer, cards that don't actually trigger Awakening the Dragon. I don't know how popular that will be, but I know that when this card comes out, if I'm still playing a backer deck, I'd probably consider Awakening the Dragon over the Huge Evolution is Over and over Starlight Road, just because it does seem really, really strong in the right circumstances and could completely catch your opponent off guard. Oh, and before I forget, I still want to review one Halloween themed card at the end of every video that I post in October. I've done that already, what, 5 or 6 times by now. So in today's video, we're reviewing Zombie Master. And what's funny is that this card isn't very competitive anymore, but it was super meta impactful for a long time. Like, plenty of formats where people were playing this card, and it was one of the earliest forms of like really, really strong zombie support that really made those old school zombie decks very powerful. So what does it do? Well, it lets you send a monster card from your hand to the graveyard to special summon a level 4 or lower zombie monster from either player's graveyard. That either player's graveyard part is really cool because not only does it mean in mirror matches you can revive your opponent's stuff, but it also means if you have a zombie world on the field, you can revive any monster in either player's graveyard as long as it's level 4 or lower, which is pretty strong and creates some pretty funny situations. Now, why was this card so good? Well, it was so good because back in the day we didn't have nearly as much revival as we do right now. We didn't have as much special summoning either, so this was a card that could churn out multiple monsters pretty easily. One of the ways that it could do that is that if you can revive another zombie master with the first zombie master, then you can use that second zombie master to revive the other card you discarded. And as long as you have at least one card that you can use this ability on, you can still discard whatever you want and then revive the card you discarded. You do have to have something in the graveyard before you use the ability because you can't activate effects that can't resolve, but at least if you have like multiple zombie masters in your hand, you can discard them for themselves and then special summon themselves back. Pretty cool stuff, especially for older school Yu-Gi-Oh! Anyway though, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's discussion video on this new Harpie's Feather Duster card. I know it might sound like I'm underplaying it or underselling it, but I think probably all the videos, I mean, I haven't seen them yet because they haven't come out yet, but I would assume most of the people looking at the card just say it's like the most broken thing ever printed. It is really strong on paper, but I think in practice you really have to keep in mind that the cards like this, they're not perfect. And when you're looking at cards like this, you really want to look at them with a critical eye because cards don't only work when you have them in the best scenarios. You also are going to draw them scenarios where you don't necessarily want them or where you can't activate them. So when we're looking at something with a drawback where like you can't control face-up cards, we really have to look at it as, okay, is this better than the other options available? For a lot of cases, the answer is going to be yes, but for some specific cases, I mean, no. Like the answer is just straight up no. Red Reboot or Twin Twisters is going to be a better card, and do people actually have the room in their side deck to play all these cards? Probably not. So it'll be interesting to see how popular it is and how many different choices people play against it, specifically like Awaken the Dragon or the Huge Revolution is Over. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.